Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, October 28, 2021. President Joe Biden announcing a nearly $1.8 trillion social spending and tax bill framework that he says can get support of enough Democrats in the U.S. House and Senate to pass. He says it was necessary to compromise. Not everyone got everything that he or she wanted, but the final product will fundamentally change the lives of millions of people for the better. Just in a moment, we'll hear from the president and also top congressional Democrats about what they think of this deal. President Biden now heading to Europe for meetings with Pope Francis, leaders of the major economic powers known as the G20, and to attend the International Climate Conference. Ahead of that, large oil company executives testifying before a House committee, Democrats saying they have intentionally misled the public for a long time about the negative effects of fossil fuels on climate change. And today, families of the victims of the 2015 Charleston, South Carolina church mass shooting settle with the U.S. Justice Department for $88 million. It's over the FBI's background check and its failure to prevent the shooter from buying a gun that he used to kill 9 people. This from the Associated Press. President Joe Biden traveled to Capitol Hill early Thursday to make the case to House Democrats for a dramatically scaled-back domestic policy package. $1.75 trillion of social services and climate change programs the White House believes can pass the 50-50 Senate. Together with a nearly $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill heading for final votes, possibly as soon as Thursday, Biden claimed a domestic achievement modeled on those of Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. President's meeting with the Congressional Democrats was behind closed doors. He then went back to the White House and made some public announcements.
Today, I'm pleased to announce that after months of tough and thoughtful negotiations, I know we have a historic economic framework. It's a framework that will create millions of jobs, grow the economy, invest in our nation and our people, turn the climate crisis into an opportunity and put us on a path not only to compete, but to win the economic competition for the 21st century against China and every other major country in the world. It's fiscally responsible. It's fully paid for. 17 Nobel Prize winners in economics have said it will lower the inflationary pressures on the economy. And over the next 10 years, it will not add to the deficit at all. It will actually reduce the deficit, according to economists. I want to thank my colleagues in the Congress for their leadership. We spent hours and hours and hours over months and months working on this. No one got everything they wanted, including me. But that's what compromise is. That's consensus. And that's what I ran on. I've long said compromise and consensus are the only way to get big things done in a democracy, important things done for the country. I know it's hard. I know how deeply people feel about the things that they fight for. But this framework includes historic investments in our nation and in our people. Any single element of this framework would fundamentally be viewed as a fundamental change in America. Taken together, they're truly consequential.
President Biden at the White House. More from the Associated Press article. Biden was eager to have a deal in hand before departing later in the day for the global summits, but the revised package has lost some of the Democrats' top priorities as the president's ambitions make way for the political realities of the narrowly divided Congress. Paid family leave and efforts to lower prescription drug pricing are now entirely gone from the package. Still in the mix, free pre-kindergarten for all youngsters, expanded health care programs, including the launch of a $35 billion new hearing aid benefit for people with Medicare, and $550 billion to tackle climate change. There's also a one-year extension of a child care tax credit that was put in place during the COVID-19 rescue, new child care subsidies, and $100 billion to bolster the immigration and border processing system. Back on Capitol Hill, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi praising the deal in her weekly news conference.
We had said for a long time now, if we had a framework that had our priorities spelled out clearly and agreed to, that added up to a top line, start with the priorities, and then added up to a top line, which was the limit. Priorities, I mentioned the top line, 1.75 approximately. and the commitment that we would have the same bill pass the House and the Senate. That's what we have now. That's what the president presented. And we won't have anything, regardless of whatever input we have in the bill, unless it is agreed to by the Senate. And of course, we have to have it comply with the Senate 51 vote rule of the Byrd rule and there are two things, the Byrd rule and the privilege scrub. Is that more on the subject than you ever want to know? But anyway, that's what we have to do. And we hope to do that soon. But we, again, have to listen as the printed version goes out. There's some clarifications that will come forth because it's always moving a bit, and that will happen in the manager's amendment. So we're on a path to get this done. But for those who said, I want to see text, the text is there for you to review, for you to complain about, for you to add to, for subtract from, whatever it is, and we'll see what consensus emerges from that. But we're really very much on a path.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi at her news conference. Those who wanted to see the text, they were members of, or are members of, the Progressive Caucus. Makes about half of the House Democrats, and it's their support that was needed to pass the smaller $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure spending bill. They wanted to make sure the larger bill was in place. Their leader, Pramila Jayapal of Washington State, spoke with reporters after the big meeting with the House Democrats and President Biden.
Well, the president made a really compelling speech for both bills. He said he wants both bills to pass. He asked for votes on both bills. He went into some detail on the framework. I would say nothing different than what I knew before. I thought he was, really impressive with his knowledge of all the pieces of the bills. He did not ask for a vote on the BIF today. The Speaker did, but he did not. He said he wants votes on both bills. And he said that what we do on these two bills is going to be determinative for how the world sees us.
So what is the position of progressives then?
Well, let's see. I mean, we're going to go meet, but I can tell you that we have had a position of needing to see the legislative text and voting on both bills, and we'll see where people are. But I think a lot of people are still in that place.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, The Hill writing, Speaker Nancy Pelosi told Democrats she will bring a Senate-passed bipartisan infrastructure bill to the floor later Thursday, rolling the dice with progressives who are vowing to vote down the roads and bridges package unless a bigger social spending package moves with it. Pelosi said she's going to hold the vote open until we get a majority. That was a quote from House Budget Committee Chair John Yarmuth, Democrat from Kentucky, a member of Pelosi's leadership team, quoted by The Hill. More now with Congresswoman Jayapal on those upcoming votes.
If the Senate would take up this bill or something similar to it.
Is this a win for you?
He said he's confident he can get the votes. It wasn't clear whether the two senators have committed to vote for it. So, look, I think it's a bit of a leap of faith in the president, and but I think, look, the first step is we got to see the legislation. And there's just a lot of details. And if it's true that there's 90% of the legislation that's written, then we should be able to get the other 10% written in the next couple of days. And then we can all take a look. And those two senators probably can be more comfortable saying whether or not they would vote for it at that point as well. So let me go.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal with reporters. She chairs the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Those two senators that she's referring to are the two key moderate Democrats in the Senate whose votes are needed to pass any bill. That's Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, Joe Manchin of West Virginia. In the Progressive Caucus, most of the members are House members, but there's one senator, Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, chair of the Budget Committee. He also spoke with reporters about the deal announced today by President Biden.
Number one, I think before there is a vote in the House on the infrastructure bill, the members of the House have a right to know that 50 U.S. senators are supporting a strong reconciliation bill. Number two, I think if you look at the bill that the President announced today, it is probably the most consequential bill since the 1960s in terms of protecting the needs of working families, of children, the elderly, the sick, and the poor. It is a major, major step forward. But clearly, to my mind, it has some major gaps in it. The American people are very, very clear that they are sick and tired of paying the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. There is, to the best of my knowledge, no language in there that takes on the pharmaceutical industry, demands Medicare, negotiating prices, and lowers the cost of prescription drugs in America. And that's a major problem in the bill. The second lacking is, I'm glad to see that hearing aids were included as part of an expansion of Medicare. But I would very much like, the American people would like to see eyeglasses and dental care as well. So I think what we have to do now is, first of all, make sure that before the vote takes place in the House, to make sure that there is a very explicit legislative language. And second of all, that we continue to do our best to make this good bill even stronger.
Does it have your support right now, Senator Sanders?
Well, I'm going to do my best to make a good bill even stronger, so I can't answer that question.
Will you try to add more of that Medicare back
yeah.
into it?
There are a number of concerns. Paid family medical leave is also a great concern.
With more on the budget bill announcement, we're joined by Natalie Andrews, congressional reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Thanks for being with us. After President Biden met with the House Democrats, the Congressional Progressive Caucus met, and we just heard from the leader, Congresswoman Jayapal, played a clip from her. You spoke with some other members. What are they saying?
Most of the members who I talked to who left that meeting were very stone-faced. I would describe the environment as grim. And they said no, they do not want to vote on the infrastructure bill without a very set framework, more than a framework, more than legislative text. They want an agreement that this framework that was released by the president is indeed what the senators who have been pulling the bill top line down. They'd like an agreement from Manchin and Sinema that this is what they support. They don't feel like they have that.
Well, President Biden reportedly told the House Democrats in their meeting that this package can get all 50 Senate Democratic Caucus members. But now we're hearing perhaps Senator Manchin and Sinema are not yet on board.
Yes. So when we've talked to Manchin and Sinema, or statements released by Sinema today, they're not putting out a full-throated statement saying we support this framework. They're not putting out really information saying that this is what they've negotiated with on the White House, and they've been a little more cagey than what House progressives would like to see. And they feel like the infrastructure bill is really their key leverage point. And so they are committed to vote against the infrastructure bill should a vote come today, unless they have something more concrete.
In the opening paragraph of your article, you call this a $1.85 trillion social spending and climate framework and a still developing product. What do we know about it and what don't we know?
Well, we know that certain things that have been kind of there all along are still there, like a universal pre-K program that we know that progressives and centrists really want. This is something that matters more to them, even more than paid family leave. They really want the universal pre-K. Also, the child tax credit would be extended for a year. What's missing are some key elements. There is not information on where the Medicare drug negotiations stand. I talked to Frank Pallone today, and he said he was still working on it. There also is not information on the state and local tax known as SALT that New York and New Jersey members are asking for.
These negotiations have been long and messy, to put it mildly.
Yeah, we are watching the sausage get made right now.
Yeah, and a lot of it was in public, some in private.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of reporters, though, comparing whatever comes out of this to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed or President Lyndon Baines Johnson passed. Is that an accurate comparison? Is this potentially economically transformative?
This bill could change the way that people access health care. It could change the way that people are able to pay for childcare and preschool and health care. It could change the way the country approaches the climate change that we're dealing with. I mean, there are transformational elements in this bill. So, and I think Democrats look at the top line number that they're preparing to spend and say, hey, this is never done before. Now, given $1.75 trillion now is a lot different than in the era of Roosevelt and LBJ, you know, given inflation, the fact that nearly 100 years have passed, that kind of thing, since we were dealing with the New Deal. But it does have the element to be transformational. Obviously, progressives would like it to be more transformational. They're looking at things that are left out of this, such as paid family leave, and saying that the United States is still falling behind in developed nations in certain ways.
Natalie Andrews, congressional reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Read her stories at WSJ.com. Follow her on Twitter at NatalieWSJ. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
We've talked about the spending portion. As for how it's going to be paid for, more from the Associated Press article. Biden's proposal would be paid for by imposing a new 5% surtax on income over $10 million a year and instituting a new 15% corporate minimum tax, keeping with his plan to have no new taxes on those earning less than $400,000 a year. Revenue to help pay for the package would also come from rolling back some of the Trump administration's 2017 tax cuts, along with stepped-up enforcement of tax dodgers by the IRS. That from Associated Press. Republicans in the House and Senate have not been part of the negotiations on the budget reconciliation bill framework announced today because their votes will not be needed to pass it if the entire Democratic caucus in the Senate votes yes, and all but a few in the House vote yes. Reaction today, though, from the Republican leaders on what they've been seeing unfold. Senator Mitch McConnell spoke on the Senate floor.
I've talked about the laundry list of left-wing boondoggles that our colleagues are packing into this plan. At the heart of it all is one simple and dangerous assumption, that American families ought to be more reliant on the federal government. Democrat plans would chase more Americans off of their private health insurance plans they chose and on to government rolls. They would shred a decades-old consensus about the importance of work and massively expand cash grants to families without any employment requirements. They want to reinvent welfare without welfare reform. There is a giveaway after giveaway that aren't even means tested. Their plans have literally proposed to have taxpayers fund free school lunch for the kids of millionaires and billionaires. No means testing whatsoever, none. In addition, Washington Democrats want to insert themselves into the middle of the most personal family decisions about child care and family structure, redistributing huge amounts of money only to households that arrange their lives the way Democrats want. In area after area, Democrats want to implement far-left policies that would make the economy worse for working families, and then clumsily try to make it up to citizens with socialism that's disconnected from work. This is a frontal assault on the nature of employment and work itself in American life. They're out to, as one economist put it, quote, fundamentally change the relationship between the state and its citizens. Even the New York Times last month called what Democrats are hammering out a, quote, cradle-to-grave reweaving of the government's role. Lower wages, fewer jobs. At least American workers will have cradle-to-grave socialism. It's one vision of the future, all right, but it's not one that Americans want. And it's one that Senate Republicans will fight every step of the way.
The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor. A new poll that came out before today's announcement showed that 36% of Americans said they approve of President Biden's handling of the negotiations over the social spending and tax bill, with 41% disapprove. And less than half said they know a lot or some about what is in it. Poll coming from Associated Press and ORC Center for Public Affairs Research. Again, that was before today's announcement. The House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, held a news conference to talk about the budget deal.
Trillions of dollars in spending, major expansions of government agencies, and even more inflation that will lead to higher costs for all Americans. Those are all on the table. Yet the details change by the minute. It could have changed since I walked in here. As one Democrat remarked, we were just missing two things: what exactly is going to be in the bill and how we're going to pay for it. Other than that, we are good to go. Remember Speaker Pelosi's famous quote, "We need to pass the bill so we can find out what's in it." When the White House rushes out a framework hours before the president comes to the Hill, you know they are desperate and just grasping for straws. This is no longer a Congress where the best ideas compete. They're now competing for a vote based upon when Air Force One lands in Rome. I have a hard time believing that the American public thinks it's a good idea for 87,000 more IRS agents. We begin to hear different things that are getting pulled out of the bill. But there's one thing that I've never heard pulled out of the bill: the $200 million for Pelosi's park. That apparently will always stay in. Speaker Pelosi has called this tax and spend bill the culmination of her career. She said it just a couple weeks ago in this very room. Based upon the number of Democrats jumping ship, this may be the culmination of many Congressional's careers. Think about it. Every week, a new Democrat announces their retirement. The Democratic budget chair, only in his second term as chair, has called it quits. Congresswoman Sherry Bustos, former DCCC chairwoman, has called it quits. And 15% of the Democratic leaders on appropriation has called it quits. With Thanksgiving around the corner, it's going to be the most expensive Thanksgiving for Americans. I wonder if President feels a little like Charlie Brown in that famous scene with the football. His advisors tell him to come back up to the Hill. They promise this time Speaker Pelosi won't pull it out from under her. But we'll find out today if she does the exact same thing.
House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy at a news conference. As the budget reconciliation bill, the social spending bill, and the separate bipartisan infrastructure bill move through the rest of the legislative process, you can follow it all live on the C-SPAN networks and watch and listen anytime, anywhere on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. On Wall Street, the Dow was up 239, NASDAQ up 212, S&P up 44. Commerce Department says the U.S. economy grew at a 2% annual rate from July to September. That's down from the 6% plus annual growth rates in each of the previous 2 quarters of the year. But the Labor Department says the number of Americans applying for unemployment benefits fell to a coronavirus pandemic low last week, dropping 10,000 to 281,000. In all, 2.2 million people were collecting unemployment checks last week. That's down from 7.7 million a year ago. A story at MarketWatch, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau Director Rohit Chopra expressed concern over big tech companies' efforts to offer financial services, given the wealth of information they have already collected on Americans' online and shopping behavior. He said it during a congressional hearing Thursday. The comments come a week after the CFPB ordered Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Square, and PayPal to turn over information about their payment products and practices to further an investigation to how big tech companies are leveraging consumer data. That all from MarketWatch. Here's part of the hearing, Senate Banking Committee. Senator Elizabeth Warren questioning the director.
Big tech platforms like Venmo and Square and Apple Pay and Facebook Pay have multiplied in recent years. So, Director Chopra, A giant company like Amazon owns an online marketplace, a cloud computing platform, a chain of grocery stores, and a payments platform. Is that combination a risk for consumers?
Yes, and it's a risk to small businesses too, Senator. And that's part of the reason why I issued these series of orders, including to Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google, to understand what are they doing with this data, how are they going to decide who gets admitted and who they're going to kick off, and is it going to be distorted by their own financial incentives?
And their own financial incentives here, meaning when they've got that kind of information, what is it that they can do?
Well, they can do a lot, and I don't think all of it is very good. Look at what Apple has done in its App Store context. There's allegations that as soon as there's an app on the App Store that competes with one of Apple's, they go in for the kill, charging higher commissions, higher fees. If our payment system and the flow of our currency is distorted by this, that is a real harm to consumers, and not just to their privacy, but to the options that they have.
Good. Not good. It's a terrible thing, but I appreciate your making this point because the risks are real. And I am glad to see that the CFPB is requiring these companies to provide data on how they operate their payment systems. It is long past time for transparency in this space. Now, you saw these companies up close and personal when you were an FTC commissioner. So I want to ask you a different question. Do you think we can trust these companies on their own to put in place the safeguards that are necessary to make sure that consumers and small businesses that use these payment platforms don't get ripped off? Or do you think you need a cop on the beat like the CFPB?
Well, one of the problems is that when I arrived to the FTC, there was a clear bias in favor of these firms. Take Venmo. Under Republicans and Democrats, the FTC just let them off the hook with a no money, no fault settlement that did almost nothing to fix things. Facebook violated its order over and over again, and the FTC's response, an immunity clause for Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. We need to make sure that it's not just the FTC, it's not just the CFPB. Every single government agency is being impacted by how big tech companies are infiltrating sectors of the economy. It's not just going to be one of us. We have to work all together to protect consumers, protect businesses, and frankly, to protect our country.
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau Director Rohit Chopra. Questions from Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat from Massachusetts, part of today's Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee hearing. Several Republicans on the committee focusing on what is being called an alleged purge of civil servants at the agency this year, and accusations that the director is not answering the Republicans' questions. Here is Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina.
We had several news reports of outlets indicating a kind of a purge in the CFPB of career staff earlier this year with the transition to the Biden administration. Can you confirm that early retirements or internal investigations of the CFPB employees were never offered or launched for political reasons?
As far as I know, they were absolutely not. As I shared earlier, I am getting briefed on it. I am seeking to understand, and we will, of course, comply with any Inspector General inquiry on it. But I have no evidence at all to suggest that there was any political purge. I'm not even aware of any terminations. So we will look into it.
Do you intend to respond to Ranking Member Toomey's request? I think it dated back to June 17th on this subject.
We will work with the committee to try and be responsive. But again, this involves personnel matters. And in the executive branch, when it comes to specific personnel, particularly when it comes to allegations of misconduct, there are certain protocols that must be followed.
Well, it just seems to me you, in your confirmation hearing, you committed to transparency. I specifically asked that question, and I think it can begin with prompt responses to committee members, particularly the ranking member. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Thom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, questioning Rohit Chopra, Director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. The director testifying before the House Financial Services Committee yesterday. It's all part of the semi-annual report to the Congress from the agency. You can find the video of today's hearing at cspan.org. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Get C-SPAN on the go. Watch the day's biggest political events live or on demand anytime, anywhere on our new mobile video app, C-SPAN Now. Access top highlights, listen to C-SPAN Radio, and discover new podcasts, all for free. Download C-SPAN Now today.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now app and wherever you get your podcasts. President Biden flying to Rome for his second overseas trip of his presidency. It will include a meeting with Pope Francis and the leaders of the G20 major industrialized countries, then off to Glasgow, Scotland for the International Climate Conference. With the president on Air Force One speaking with reporters, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
In the run-up to this G20, it's been the U.S. and Europe together driving the bus on the significant global issues, whether it's the global methane pledge and the ambitious climate commitments heading into COP26, or it's the work together to get the global minimum tax done to be cemented and ratified, agreed at the G20, or it's the joint work on COVID-19. And I think you'll see the U.S. and Europe front and center at this G20 as we deal with the fact that neither the leaders of Russia nor China will be present in the room in Rome. So that dynamic will be interesting to watch unfold. And then finally, we are trying to work through some remaining climate-related deliverables at the G20, language in the communique, as well as ensuring that we're not just dealing with the current pandemic, but one of the things the G20 is focused on is how we prepare the global community better for future pandemics to prevent, detect, and respond to them going forward.
The National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan with reporters on Air Force One as they were all flying over with the president to Rome. And the Vatican announcing today that it has canceled the planned live broadcast of President Joe Biden meeting Pope Francis on Friday, instead saying it's going to release edited footage after the fact to accredited media. Ahead of the climate change conference in Scotland, today on Capitol Hill, a hearing with the CEOs of major oil companies. It was before the House Oversight and Reform Committee. Democrats on the committee saying the companies have for decades spread disinformation about the role of fossil fuels in causing climate change. Here's part of the hearing. Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, the committee chair, questioning ExxonMobil CEO Darren Woods.
Mr. Woods, I want to ask you about some public statements that your predecessor, Lee Raymond, made in 1996 and 97 as the world was debating an agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions known as the Kyoto Protocol. Here's what Mr. Raymond said in 1996, and I quote, "Currently, the scientific evidence is inconclusive as to whether human activities are having a significant effect on the global climate," end quote. And I'd like to place his statement in the record without objection. And this was no slip of the tongue. In 1997, he gave another speech where he denounced the effects in Kyoto and said, quote, "The case for global warming is far from airtight," end quote. Mr. Woods, when Exxon's CEO made these remarks about the inconclusive nature of the scientific evidence, were they consistent with the views of Exxon's own scientists?
Yes, Chairwoman, thank you for the question. Appreciate the opportunity to address that. Our understanding of the science has been aligned with the consensus of the scientific community as far back as 20 years ago when you referenced our chairman at that time's comments. And as science has evolved and developed, our understanding has evolved and developed, as has our work and position on the statement.
Well, as you make your statement, I'm reminded of another hearing that we had with the tobacco industry. And we had all the executives seated in this room, and they were asked about their statements from their companies that the science was uncertain. And they said they did not believe that nicotine was addictive. Well, it came out that they lied. Tobacco, nicotine was very addictive. And now I'm hearing from you that the science that was reported publicly, where your executives were denying climate change, we know that your scientists internally were saying that it's a reality. So I was hoping that you would not be like the tobacco industry was and lie about this. And I was hoping that you would be better than the tobacco industry and that you would have come out with the truth, and I'm disappointed with the statement that you made.
Carolyn Maloney, chair of the House Oversight and Reform Committee, Democrat from New York, with ExxonMobil CEO Darren Woods. After the hearing, or as the hearing was wrapping up, Carolyn Maloney announcing that she plans to subpoena oil companies and trade groups for key documents related to their conduct around climate change. Other witnesses today included the CEOs of Chevron, BP America, and Shell. Republicans on the committee also getting an opportunity to invite their own witnesses, and one was a former welder on the Keystone XL pipeline, Neil Crabtree. Questioned now by the committee ranking Republican James Comer of Kentucky.
How long had Joe Biden been president before you were fired from your position working for the Keystone pipeline?
Yeah, thank you for the question, but I think I made that clear in my opening statement that it was 3 hours after I'd lost my job. Now, I've got to be truthful and I've got to be fair. I've got to work since then, but most of the work that we're doing now is kind of maintaining the aging infrastructure, the pipeline systems that we have in this country now. And like I said in my testimony, not adding additional capacity when there's still such a great demand for it is causing these fuel prices to rise. And to me, it's a serious national security issue when we have to write letters to OPEC asking for more oil. It's a serious issue when we consider drawing oil out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve wasn't put in place to bail out incompetent decisions.
Let me say, we're going to talk a lot about that during this hearing, and I appreciate that. My next question, did President Biden or anyone from the White House ever apologize to you for creating a situation where you lost your job immediately upon his taking office?
Well, of course not. I'm just a simple welder. I wouldn't expect an apology. It probably wouldn't have meant much to me. You know, apology isn't going to put food on my table. Apology doesn't pay my bills. Being able to work is what I need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, last week, President Biden said that gas prices won't go down until 2022, and he said during his town hall when asked what he was going to do to reduce gas prices, he didn't have an answer on that. What, in your opinion, impact does shutting down one pipeline, in this case Keystone, have on energy prices?
Well, I can give you a number. Number one is transportation cost. This pipeline was going to replace the transportation. This oil has already been coming into the country. We're using it. It's coming in by rail. And when you can build a pipeline, you can cut transportation costs by nearly a third.
And probably reduce your carbon footprint at the same time, right?
Exactly. This was a pipeline that was going to run off of green energy. A lot of people don't know that. And number two is market speculation. You know, the country seeing what was happening. The very first thing that President Biden done, and when you see an attack on the industry like that, you know, some of the prices on the markets are a lot of it's speculation. They see this attack on it, and you get people buying up contracts because they're worried about not being able to have any.
Neil Crabtree, one of the witnesses at today's House Oversight and Reform Committee hearing on climate change and fossil fuels. Questions from Congressman James Comer, the ranking Republican. NBC News reports the Justice Department agreed Thursday to settle a series of lawsuits filed by survivors and families of the victims of the 2015 deadly church shooting in Charleston, South Carolina. 9 people were killed when a 21-year-old white supremacist, Dylan Roof, entered Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church during Bible study and began firing a handgun. He later confessed, saying he acted in hopes of igniting a race war. The family sued after the FBI revealed that its system for conducting background checks failed to catch a fact that should have blocked the sale of the gun that Roof used in the shooting. That from NBC. One of the speakers at today's news conference outside the Justice Department in Washington, D.C., Eliana Pinckney, daughter of one of the shooting victims, late Reverend and State Senator Clementa Pinckney.
I just first wanted to say thank you to my family and to all of the people standing behind me who have supported me and my family over the last 6 years. It very clearly is not an easy journey. It's already so hard to lose someone you love, but it's even harder to grow up without a father, knowing that he lost his life in a place that he devoted his entire life to. That is something that is so hard to grasp with and so hard to understand and so hard to grow from. But it's so important that I've had a community behind me who have helped me get to the place that I am now. No amount of compensation will ever replace my father's life, but through the help and the opportunities that the government and the people standing behind me have provided, it allows me and my sister to have the opportunity to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that my father's legacy doesn't go away, to make sure that we are doing everything we can with the rest of our lives, living to our fullest potential, and making sure that his legacy stays uplifted. I've spent the rest of my life from the day that he died till the day that I die, making sure that I'm doing whatever I can to make my father proud, to make sure that everything he fought for doesn't go unspoken, doesn't go forgotten. So I just, again, wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who has made it possible for us to be here, for me to still be living the way that I am, for me to have the opportunity to be happy with my family and these people who love me so much. So yeah, thank you again so much.
Eliana Pinckney at a news conference outside the Justice Department building in Washington today. She was home the day of that shooting in 2015, but she mentioned her sister, Milana. She was at Bible study at the church when it happened in Charleston, South Carolina. Milana also joining today's news conference. The settlement provides $63 million for the families of those killed and $25 million for the survivors. And finally, on Washington today, a congratulations to Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, for her longevity. Here on the Senate floor is the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, followed by the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell.
I rise today to recognize a great milestone in this chamber. Our colleague, Susan Collins, will in a few moments cast her 8,000th vote. I join in extending warm... Thank you, Kirsten.
That's an applause.
I join in extending a warm congratulations to Senator Collins on this terrific achievement and thank her for her many years of public service to her state and country. And in deference to this nice occasion, I would ask we all stay in the chamber, vote quickly so we can leave. I know that's a passion of Senator Collins. Seriously, we should all try to stay in the chamber and get this done fast. Thank you.
Madam President.
Republican leader.
January the 22nd, 1997, Senator Collins cast her first roll call vote for Madeleine Albright to be Secretary of State. From that moment on, she's not missed one single solitary vote. 0 sick days, 0 scheduling conflicts, whether we were voting on war or peace, historic legislation, or the most routine and uncontroversial bills and nominations, the senator has made sure that Maine got its say every single time.
The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, before that, the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, today on the floor. Comparing Senator Collins' 8,000 votes, at Senate.gov, there's a list of every senator who has cast more than 10,000 votes. There are 32 on the list in all of U.S. history, including 4 current ones. Mitch McConnell, Chuck Grassley, Richard Shelby, and Patrick Leahy. And the all-time record holder is the late Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia, 18,689. Thanks for listening to Washington Today, and for more Washington stories delivered to your inbox every day, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word, at c-span.org/connect. I hope you have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we're taking your calls live, on the air, on the news of the day. And we'll discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Friday morning, the president of Americans for Tax Reform, Grover Norquist, discusses tax measures being considered to pay for President Biden's Build Back Better spending bills. Then Ray Suarez and Alyssa Quart talk about the Going for Broke podcast, which profiles those who've endured economic hardship in the U.S. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Friday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our new mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, text messages, and tweets.